Alright guys, so I just wanted to go through and give you some explanations about I Have a Dream. So I know that this speech has a lot of higher language, there's a lot of figurative stuff in there, so I don't want you to get lost in all that's going on and kind of miss the bigger picture. So throughout the whole speech, he's starting out talking about a period of darkness that they're in. Their past, their present is a period of darkness, okay? Then you get to about paragraph 7-ish, and he starts to talk about how there's this blooming light of autumn, and he's talking about this ideal society that he sees, you know, where little black girls and little black boys are friends with white boys and white girls, and they can play together, and these racist states like Mississippi and Alabama are joining together, and they're all getting rid of racism. So I don't want you to get lost in all the other things that are going on and all the big words that he uses and things like that and kind of miss the bigger picture. So don't get lost on that. That being said, I do want to walk you guys through some of the figurative language in here, okay? So in paragraph 3, so I can read my computer screen. So in paragraph 3, there's a lot of parallelism in there. He's going to talk about 100 years later, 100 years later, 100 years later. And that's parallelism. So parallelism and repetition are very similar. Parallelism is going to be more of the structure of the sentence and not necessarily so much the words. So I don't want you to think that parallelism and repetition are completely different, because they're really not. They are very similar. So, and then in paragraph 3, you're going to have that charged language. So the charged language in there is going to be still crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, he lives on an island, lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of prosperity. So what he's saying, and what I want you to understand is, if he would have just said, I'm poor, everyone around me is not. Hang on. Okay, it would not have had the same effect as saying I'm on a lonely island of poverty and an ocean of prosperity. Okay, so make sure that you're understanding that that kind of language is charged. 100 years later, so that's going to be significant because in 1863, Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, which freed the slaves. So you need to make sure that you're looking at that historical background on those slides as well. And the analogy, in paragraph 4 is going to be a really big analogy about insufficient funds. So in paragraph 4, he's talking about how basically the United States wrote a bad check. So if I wrote a check and I was going to go pay for some clothes, and I wrote a check for $100, and that's me promising that store $100, and I only had $50 in my bank account, that would be a bad check, okay? Because I don't have enough money to give them what I promised. So basically he's saying that the U.S. promised them a certain amount of justice, 100% justice and freedom and things like that, but they were only able to give them 50%. And he says that the Bank of Justice is not bankrupt, meaning that they had enough funds to do that. They just didn't make good on their promise. So I want you to understand that analogy. He's kind of making it out like the U.S. wrote them a hot check, but they weren't really bankrupt. And so I want you to understand that what he's talking about symbolizes the justice that the United States did not give Black people during that time. Okay. In 6 and 7, we are going to talk about kind of contrasting and opposing images. What I want you to really pick up here is he's talking about, let's see, now is the time to rise from a dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Okay, so a dark valley to a sunlit path. Those are opposing images. Those create two different mental images in your brain. So I want you to make sure that you understand that he's doing that for a reason. We're in this place, this dark, desolate valley. You know, a valley is the low spot between two mountains. Okay, so we're in this valley. It's dark, it's desolate. There's lots of racism. There's no justice. But we're going towards this sunlit path of racial justice, okay? So I want you to see that contrast that he's giving there. Those are two different things. Contrast means that they're opposites, okay, that they're not alike. Okay, so these images suggest the speaker's view of both the present and the future. He's saying that the present is dark and desolate and the future is among a sunlit path, okay? And the images add urgency. Not only does this imagery add urgency, like, oh my gosh, we're in this dark and desolate valley, we need to get out of here. He's saying it now, the fierce urgency of now. Now is the time to make real promises. Now is the time to rise from the dark. Now is the time to lift our nation. Now is the time to make justice a reality. So make sure that you're really understanding that. Paragraphs 1 through 6, there is a common theme of broken promises. So that's going to be kind of the broken promise. The United States wrote a check for $100 and only had $50, okay? Things like that. In paragraphs 8 and 9, Dr. King is speaking to his people. And what I want you to understand is his people is not just black people or just white people. He is speaking to everybody. And he's telling them that Dr. King was very famous for nonviolent protest. And he is telling them, hey guys, we can't drink from a cup of bitterness and hatred. So we don't need to be violent to do this. We have to come together as brothers and sisters, and must rise above to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force. So I want you to really remember that Dr. King was a preacher. He was very famous for being nonviolent, and he wanted his people to have freedom. He wanted there to be freedom in the U.S., but he didn't want it to come at a price of violence and things like that. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about some of the things. I'm just going to put all of these in one video. So let's talk about some of the things that happened towards the end of this speech. So in paragraph 26 and 27, I want you to kind of note the words and phrases and paragraphs that refer to sounds or music. So I'm going to read 26 and 27. With this faith, we will be able to hew out the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. And this will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with this new meaning, okay? So he's saying that, have you ever heard a guitar with one chord missing, or all the chords are jangled up and not, tuned correctly, not strung correctly? He's saying that, the United States is in a discord. It's like a guitar that has strings that aren't strung correctly. But when we get those strings together, we transform the jangling discords of our nation into this beautiful symphony. So that's what he's trying to say, is we need to get out of this kind of state that we're in and get into this beautiful symphony together. That was his main message, is he wanted us to do it together. He wanted people to come together to end racism, not fight against each other. Okay. Let's see. Okay. And then in paragraphs 12 through 41, I want you to just note that it is a little bit different than the beginning of this speech. In the beginning of the speech, he's talking about how it's kind of a dark and desolate place that he's in. But at the end, he's talking about his dream. He's giving you a vision of something positive. So that's the main things I want you to take away from this speech. Make sure you watch the video on Jim Crow laws that's in the PowerPoint. And if you have any questions, as always, just shoot me an email.